sexual immorality, murder and theft, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, folly. All of those evils come from within a person. And that is what defiles the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't know about you, but it's very tempting to jump on the bandwagon of condemnation of Jesus' call to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. It's easy from 2,000 years of perspective to look down our nose on those that were holding so stringently to rules. But you can tell from my tone, I'd obviously caution against that. For the lesson of Jesus to the Pharisees is the very same lesson to us today. It's not about the letter of rules, it's about the heart of them. Simply stated, it's about a rule of love. I think, though, it's helpful to understand our own situation by understanding a little more of where the Pharisees and teachers of the law were coming from. There's an author by the name of Thomas Cable that wrote a book called The Gifts of the Jews. And one of the premises of the book is that of all the religious traditions that have come out of antiquity, particularly in the West, what makes Judaism somewhat unique is its call to a holy and righteous living, to a very clearly stated code of ethics, a code of behavior. As we heard in the Old Testament lesson, you are to follow these commands and it'll go well with you, but you are to be careful that you follow these commands, and you are to teach these commands to your children and your children's children, and they are to do the same. The Pharisees, the teachers of the law, were dealing with working on 2,000 years of a general rule and working on 1,500 years since the time of Moses of some very specifically articulated ones. They had been taught, just as their parents had been taught, just as their grandparents had been taught, that there is a way to live. And over the course of that time, the attention to that detail had begun to cloud the heart of the rule behind it. How successfully righteous they were came down to stepping away from a crack so you didn't break the faith of your back or your mother's back. And it was hard to reconcile. Here's this holy person, seemingly anyway, who's been attributed to many a miracle, and yet he's not teaching his closest group of followers to necessarily follow these rules to the letter. What gives here? There's a disconnect. That's fairly understandable, perhaps in Williamsburg, Iowa. There's an understanding of what it is to follow rules. Over the course of time, I think there are effectively two groups of people marked by how they look at success. Not just religious or spiritual success, but just in general. And I think the majority of folks fall into the category of doing what has been done before to the letter, and doing it well, or maybe even better than it's ever been done. I mean, we live here among the Amana colonies, who have, the whole tourism economy has been developed around tradition, doing things by hand, doing things painstakingly the right way. People come from all over for the crafts the clothing, the furniture that have been made here, because these folks do it right, and they've done it right for generations. It's not shoddy, it's good work. And as you drive to Williamsburg and see the fields so elegantly maintaining to the contours of the land, the waterways manicured, the farmhouses impeccable, flower boxes without a weed. I mean, ethnically, many are German. And while many traditions and nationalities are known for rule following, Germans are pretty good at it. This is an area that understands what it is to hold to the tradition of the elders, and to do it right, and to do it well. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problems arise when we forget why we're doing what we're doing. When I would do premarital counseling, one of the things that I would talk about with a couple is their perspective and their family's expectation of holidays. And they always looked at me kind of strangely, and I said, let me tell you what, if you come from a family where Christmas is observed at grandmother's house, and it's not observed on Christmas Eve, it's not observed on the 26th, it's observed on the 25th, and by golly, you're there, and you're there for dinner time, and your family is there, and your spouse comes from the same tradition, you got a problem. And you think this is minor. Is it really? Have we forgotten that we're to celebrate Christmas and the joy of Christ, but instead we get wrapped up in the following of rules? It happens to all of us. What rules in your life have you perhaps forgotten the heart of and trying to keep the letter? Challenge you to think about that a little bit. But there's another group of people who measure success a little bit differently, and I'm in that category. Though I should be in the former. I should be a rule follower. My dad was a research scientist. My mother was a CPA. My maternal grandparents were teachers, one of them a librarian. My paternal grandfather was an engineer. My paternal grandmother was a nurse. All vocations where rule following is pretty doggone important. I should be genetically programmed to be the best rule follower there was. And let me tell you, I'm not. I measure success, like some others, in terms of finding some new way to skin the cat, even if it means a bunch of failures. And that's not bad either, but it does present a problem because I'm also Presbyterian. A number of years ago, I was actually co-moderator of COM. Boy, talk about putting the fox in charge of the hen house. What a fiasco that had the potential to be. For those of you that are not Presbyterian, that's the Committee on Ministry that's responsible for making sure churches follow the rules. It was the wrong choice to have me be moderator. But the hope was I would bring some fresh perspective. And thanks be to God, I was always working alongside someone who was a co-moderator who was much better at that than I am. Those of you that are clerks of the session, I admire the daylights out of you. But when it came to session minute reviews, I could care less. And when it came to that annual report you had to give to Louisville, that drove me up the wall. Thank heavens there are folks that are better at it than I am. I have a heart for trying new ways to reach those that maybe have not yet been confronted with the rule of law. And that's fine too. But there's also an arrogance in that, a folly. Some of the same evils that Jesus articulated in that passage. And thinking that you can somehow bypass the rules, or maybe they don't apply to you as much as they do to other people, you can see that that's a problem. And in parts of my life, particularly early on, my certain disregard for the rules had some pretty nasty consequences. So what do? If following the recipe to righteousness doesn't necessarily get you where you want to go, and if arrogantly trying to go a new way doesn't get you where you want to go, then how do we respond? Simply stated, when you look back at this passage, Jesus had just finished calling the Pharisees and teachers of the law hypocrites, and then he called everyone around him, not just the Pharisees, not just the teachers of the law, not just the disciples, but a bunch of other folks. And I bet there were a few there that knew something, knew that they had broken rules, a lot of rules. And they weren't interested in success. They were just trying to survive because they had felt that they had perhaps broken so many rules that there was no way back. Maybe you're in that boat. If not, I bet you know the names of a couple folks who are. So what do? Quite simply, when the recipe doesn't guarantee righteousness, when arrogantly plowing our own way, I would simply say to choose one person to start and set some time with them. If there's someone that's broken the rules, they're probably going to look at you, and if you're a rule follower, they're going to think, great, I'm going to get a lecture from someone who doesn't know what it's like to be me. Or if it's someone who goes their own way, the thought might be, well, who are you to try to tell me some new way, to offer me some sort of silly promise that I'm not convinced you believe yourself. So I'm going to challenge you to offer them something different. To sit down with them and offer that time when you broke the rules. And your heart broke. And in that time, you met the one who followed all of the rules perfectly. You met the one that followed the heart of all those rules perfectly. Tell them of the time. Very simply state your story of when you met the one who laid down that fateful day and had all of that brokenness taken into his broken body. When all that defiles, all that was evil, was poured out literally in blood. Tell them of the time that you saw that cross raised. Tell them when you heard the words, "It is finished." Tell them of when 3 days later that stone was rolled away and you walked out with them and your heart was changed. Tell them that story. Because even very simply stated, even if they don't hear it, I basically guarantee you that the process of your taking the time to articulate your own story has a way of throwing away all of the excess, of stripping away the lip service, but bringing you to a place where once again you're reminded of why you're here today. Why you're in First Presbyterian Church of Williamsburg. You're here to worship the one God simply loved you. Loved you enough to die. Rose from the dead to keep you with me forever. simply share the rule of love changes you. And they just might listen. And they just might be changed. Talk about simply stating your faith. 180 or so years after Jesus' death, there was an understanding of the basic tenets of the faith that was coalesced into a creed, a profession of faith, simply known as to us today as the Apostles' Creed. Let us stand as we are able and share that together. I believe in God,